Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Ferris Weekly. Today, into our second session in the series of leadership conversations. And we'll focus today on the power basis of leadership, or in other words, how leaders use power in their leadership within the business. And that's another very important topic in our leadership conversations as part of the leadership series. I actually cannot imagine that any leadership development program or coaching program can pass by without addressing the issue of power and power basis and how we use power in leadership. I just cannot imagine. Again, this is part of our leadership coaching capabilities that we're trying to build based on the framework that we have developed and according to the number of products that we have. We have now a number of products. We have launched 7 new products for the leadership development, but we need to enrich these products now with the right conversations that help you to be effective as you deliver leadership coaching in general. We covered last week the first topic or the first conversation, and that was around the practical wisdom, how a leader need to acquire practical wisdom. And we identified from research 6 abilities that leaders need to develop in their leadership style to be able to demonstrate practical wisdom, their approach, judgment, essence, context, communication, the political power, and the mentoring part. And if you have missed last week, please review it on the portal. So that was the session for last week, practical wisdom as a conversation. The conversation we'll have today is around power, and it's based on the French and Raven's research. It's an academic research, actually, that was done in 1959, where they identified that there are 5 forms of power. And those 5 forms of powers can easily be recognized if we just monitor how the individual influence people around them and how they impact the agenda in general. So this is how it gets detected. Now, you can easily understand that yourself if you just monitor through your relationships, through your previous experiences, how leaders you worked for, the ones you liked, what they were doing, the ones you didn't like, what they were doing. You will understand immediately after the session today how they use power and how they use power to achieve certain outcomes and whether they achieved it or not, and whether it has a negative impact or not as well. So the research here is done by psychologists French and Raven, John French and Bedra Raven, and they studied this phenomena for more than half a century. More than half a century ago. And despite the age, the research is still very valid based on further studies that was carried here in terms of how leaders influence the agenda around them. What French and Raven described as 5 bases of power. Their research identified 5 bases of power. The first one is the legitimate power, and that has to do of my title. I am the boss. I have a power given to me. I am the policeman. I have a power given to me. I'm the judge. I have power given to me. The legitimate power usually comes because the individual believes that they have the right due to their position. And that's maybe the most widely used one and also the most abused one. So that's the first power base that can be used. The second one is the reward base. And that's if I have the power to reward people for performance, for activities, or compensate them for what I want them to do. So basically I'm compensating them for compliance. Then you have the expert power. And that's basically my level of knowledge and expertise and my ability to demonstrate that. Then we have the reverent power. The reverent power is more around my attributes as a leader, my capacity to attract others towards me, and how others perceive me. That's the reverent power. We have then the coercive power, and it's more about the punishment power, really. If people don't get me what I want, I have the power to punish them. And that can be power that can be used. Imagine a policeman who does not use the coercive power, or a judge does not use the coercive power. It's important for them to effect their job. After the initial survey was done, or the initial study was done on the 5 bases of power, French and Raven discovered around 6 years later another power base, which is informational power. That's the power of information. What I know as information and my ability to use it as a powerful source, either to affect the agenda or to manipulate others. So that's the information power. And I dare to say that I can add one myself to this research now, which is more current, which is the digital power. I think there is a digital power that we cannot underestimate nowadays. These powers can be classified or categorized into 2 groups. The positional power sources, which is coming from my position. I am the CEO, hence I have legitimate power. I have reward power. I have coercive power. I have information power. So this set of powers belongs to the position, really. But then we have the personal power sources, the expert power and the referent power. Now, as you easily detect here, the positional power is the one used most of the time, and the one abused also most of the time, and not necessarily delivering results, to people in terms of achieving what they want to achieve. But it seems to be widely used. People usually are very busy, and because they are very busy, they will use the power that consume less time from them and maximize their outcome, but not necessarily being effective as in doing the right thing for the long term, for the relationship, and for the people around them. But this is how we can maybe categorize the collection of positional power and personal power into 2 groups. If we start to work through this one by one, just to understand it with example, a legitimate power, as I mentioned earlier, is based on my ability to influence others because I am in a position of authority, so I can make a request, actually. That's what the position power is all about. I am the boss and I'm telling you to do this now. Now, that's a position power. The problem here, the scope is limited to situations that others believe that you have the right to control. So if I work for you, you can command me of what to do during the working hours, but if you cannot do that outside the working hours. You can command me about the work, you cannot command me about my hobbies or my interests. So the power here is limited to the situation itself. The second one is the reward power. And the reward power is based on the fact that I have the capacity to promise and deliver a positive outcome, and that in itself become a reward for a performance. So I may suggest that for my employee, if you complete this job within a week, I'll give you 2 days off. I have here the capacity to reward. But again, it's limited to the ability to reward, what I can reward you for, what I cannot reward you for, and also what I can reward with, and also the perceived value of rewards. If the reward is not perceived highly by the recipient, then definitely they will turn it down, or they may not even feel it was something they are obliged to fulfill. The expert power is more about what I know, my skills, my ability, and usually people who exercise the expert power within the field because they have the capacity to provide the right input and the right advice, and usually they get heard for. And that's obviously something that I can personally rely on. If you think of myself, what sort of power I can use to drive the business at Pharos or in coaching. It's my expert power. I don't have actually any positional power on the organization as such. Also, I am the founder, but I don't have any legitimate power that can put me. What put me in the front of you is the expert power, and that's the one I actually rely on most of the time. I can combine with other things, but that's the dominant one. Maintain the expert power that I can use to help you and support you. The problem here is obviously limited to the field of knowledge. So this expert power, I cannot use it outside the coaching space. So maybe if we have a discussion around financial matters or in the banking sector, I may not be able to provide you with the right input here. Then we have the referent power, and the referent power is about there is a microphone open. If I may ask you please to mute it because it does affect the recording. Thank you. Thank you. The referent power is about my capacity to attract people around me, and has to do with the attributes of the individual and how those attributes actually attract people towards me. So that may require us to do some work on this in coaching, like social intelligence and others. It depends really, but I'm sure you will agree with me that there are certain people who get attracted to because of their characteristics, of their attributes, their capacity to attract others, and have others coming to them and finding it's interesting to spend time with them. But it is big responsibility because it needs to be guided. Why is that? Assume I am relying heavily on my referent power, and then suddenly I get promoted and now I have a legitimate power. So people likes me, I know that they likes me, but I am going now to use my directive power to get what I want done. And because I know they like me, they are not going to go away from me, which obviously may not be the right thing to do. So it needs some guidance in terms of how you apply it. Then you have the coercive power, of course. The coercive power is power to punish. If you don't do this, you will lose such and such. If you don't complete this task, you will lose your bonus. It's limited in effect to the topic in hand, and it's very easy to abuse actually. So, but do we need it? Yes, as I mentioned earlier, policemen cannot operate without a coercive power. A judge cannot cooperate without coercive power, because that's really what the society expects from them. Finally, we have the informational power. And the informational power, as I mentioned, is about knowledge of certain information, having the information, controlling the information that others needs or want, give me power. And that power, again, can be abused and misused, can manipulate people, can trigger wrong actions because I have the information and I hold it back. People don't know about it. They may act in a certain way. But that's definitely not the right approach. And also information is important, need to be tactfully used, but we need to be careful from withholding the information back. So those are the 6 power bases that has been identified in the research. And, to understand this, we need to understand where it's coming from, whether it is positional, whether it is personal, and then we need to define how those powers work together. And each one of us usually rely on one source of power. We need to diversify the source of power that we use to influence others. That's important for us to be able to build the leadership. Now, besides what we have noted in the literature, as in academic literature, the consulting literature listed already a number of power bases. That's really an extract from the academic literature, like the resource power, the information power, we talked about this, positional power, we talked about the proxy power, and that's basically about whom I know and how can I use my relationship to achieve what I want, the reward power, the sanction power, the expert power, the personal power or the referent power, the status power, charisma power, the referent power again, intellectual power, favor power, and technical power. Favor power is more about if I do someone a favor, if I'm in a position to do others favors, I expect them to return it, and that gives me a power position. So, but again, this is the consulting literature, and I think what they have done here, they took the academic research and put it in a language that the layman can understand. That's really what it is. So, if you like to use it by all means, but really you can refer to the key 6 power bases that we covered early on as the foundation for what we want to do. So that's the power bases as we discussed. Well, how we apply this in coaching? To apply this in coaching, it's first, it's as I mentioned earlier, I cannot imagine any coaching exercise without having a discussion around how I use power. I cannot imagine any leadership development without understanding how I use my power basis. Second, most of the problem comes in leadership because the way the leader uses their power. So it's a very rich ground for us in coaching. And to help someone to recognize how the power they use influence others around them and help them to uncover what they experience is our job. We need to identify here the type of power that they naturally used. There are things that they do naturally without thinking, and it usually refers to one kind of power. And sometimes it makes them stuck or get stopped, and sometimes it works for them. So we need to understand that components through the coaching conversation. We need to identify also what sort of positive powers they are using. Positive powers means powers, obviously something like coercive power is a negative power. Positive power is something that can generate energy and can help to motivate people and influence people to move forward. Once we understand what power bases they use, what power bases they need to use going forward, what we can do here is to apply the solution focused coaching, the SFC, and all of you studied this with me during your school. The SFC is around constructing solutions to fix the issue. So let's say that someone is overusing the legitimate power and they decided, I want to use the expert power and the referent power. What we do is to bring this to the table and start to put solutions for them using SFC so they can start to practice and exercise. But that would be our approach on how we bring this to the coaching space. Usually, we work through the process by asking questions like, which of these bases do I have available to me in my role at work? Some of these bases may not be available for the information for the individual. Let's say the individual don't have the capacity to reward people. Then they cannot use the rewards power. So it depends really on what's available for the individual and what they can use or cannot use. Also, which of these do I use most frequently and why I use it? Usually we rely on one, maybe two of sources, but no more than that. We need to know why we're using it, because that will help us to understand whether we use it correctly or not, or for the right purpose or not. Which of these am I less comfortable using? Why I'm not using the expert power as an example? Why I'm not comfortable with that? And then, which would I like more of? And how would that help me? How would your answers vary from other situations? Let's say that you decide that I would like to use more of the informational power. How that will affect other environment around you, like the society you live in, like the family, like your friends. How that will work if you are to apply in other settings as well. We can leave our clients with is what I call the coaching exercise. And the coaching exercise is to help them with a log to go away and they go through each power base and write down when and how they have used it. Maybe give them a week of observation so they can register which power base they used and how they used it, and ask them to ask themselves basically if they use it appropriately, what was the expected outcome and what was not expected, and decide basically how to do that next time differently so you learn from it. So that's a good way to approach it. Think about people who have power and influence you. Learning about power base is not only about managing my power style in leadership, but also about how to manage others around me when they apply their power styles on me. So if I'm aware of it, I can manage it better now. And basically work through this process to learn if which power base you work for me better and which power base does not work for me better. And when you feel powerless or overly influenced by others, think about how you can regain your own power here and control. How? By changing your power base. Try to acquire another power base that can help you. Now, the use of power is around influencing people at present, and making us having good presence and causing an impact. So that's what the use of power is all about. And that's what we will cover next week. But let me just go back on an important question that was raised by the Australian group this morning. The question had two folds. The first fold, what's the relationship between this and the power measure on the MVPI? Second, how can I help someone to manage their bosses if the boss is giving them pain all the time using the power basis? And I think it was a very good question. First part of the question around the MVPI, the power in MVPI is an indication that the individual get motivated with power. They value power. They want to be in a position when they can influence the agenda, when they can have impact on people, when they can make decisions. That's what they want to do. So that's the first thing. Now, how that relate to the power basis? It depends what power basis they need. So it may be I value power, but you know what? I only use coercive power. So I punish people when they don't meet my needs. That can, of course, be very short-lived. It doesn't live long because people don't like to be managed this way. So we need to understand here that the diversity in the power base is important. So how I deal with a boss who is hard to deal with and try to give me direction, try to give me instruction. A good example I can give is coming from a group of hospitals that I'm working with right now. And the head of the operation, or actually the founder and the owner of the operation, has a very strong, legitimate power-based preferences. So basically, I'm the boss and I tell you what to do. The problem they have in the hospital, of course, they have highly educated people who are heads of departments, and they want to have projects and they have interested in some activities that can bring the hospital to the next level. So they used to go in with requests for funding and all get rejected. All, I mean it all. Now, I was involved with them to coach them, and what I've learned in the process, I've learned about the boss, I've learned about the heads of departments, and we used actually the power basis. The boss had, of course, the legitimate power here because he's a boss and the owner, while they only had the expert power and they were not using it. So we started here to leverage and capitalize on the expert power to bring it forward, to help us to put propositions for the owner or the head of the group. And we managed to do this using that type of power, the power based on expertise, because I know how I can justify it, I can give you details, I can show you the future because of my expertise. This is how we built it up. And it worked actually. So just don't want you to underestimate that the use of power bases is very, very useful thing for us to succeed.